Hello friends, welcome to a new topic today. In this chapter we are going to learn a few points about chronic kidney disease. Okay, so first we will see the staging of chronic kidney disease. So if you see the staging of chronic kidney disease has been divided into five stages. One, we have kidney description when kidney damage. In the stage 1 there is kidney damage, but there is normal GFR. If there is normal GFR associated with kidney damage, then GFR is more than 90 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square, then that is stage 1. In stage 2, if there is mild reduction in GFR, then that is 60 to 89 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. If there is moderate reduction in GFR, then it is 30 to 59 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. If there is, that is stage 3. In stage 4, there is severe reduction in GFR, which is 15 to 29 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. In stage 5, there is kidney failure, that is less than 5 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. So if you see, we have different diseases which are associated with chronic kidney disease. So what are they? There are some glomerular diseases associated with chronic kidney disease, like diabetes mellitus, which is the leading cause of chronic kidney disease. Chronic, acute or rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis is associated with chronic kidney disease. Systemic lupus erythematosus or HIV associated nephropathy, amyloidosis. So all these are the different causes of chronic kidney disease. Then if you see cystic diseases, we have polycystic kidney disease, which is both dominant and recessive forms. Medullary cystic kidney disease, that is nephronophthisis. So all these are associated with chronic kidney disease. Then we have tubulointerstitial diseases like chronic tubulointerstitial nephritis, obstructive uropathy, reflux nephropathy. So all these can lead to chronic kidney disease, right? Then vascular diseases like hypertension, which is the second leading cause of chronic kidney disease, ischemic nephropathy, that is renal artery stenosis, vasculitis, which is renal limited or systemic. So these are the causes of chronic kidney disease. So we have these many causes for chronic kidney disease. Now if you have chronic kidney disease, okay, what is mainly important in chronic kidney disease is the variations in calcium and phosphate. They are mainly responsible for all the clinical manifestations which we see here. So if you see, in calcium and phosphate metabolism, we have calcium and phosphate in food. So first we will see the normal calcium metabolism, calcium and phosphate and vitamin D in food. So they are absorbed in the intestine. Okay, so this vitamin D which is absorbed in the intestine, this whenever there is, it is also that is absorbed in the intestine to the liver. Then this vitamin D is also produced from the skin with the help of UV light. UV light converts cholesterol to vitamin D. Okay, so this vitamin D in the presence of liver, in the liver we have 25 hydroxylases. These 25 hydroxylases will convert this vitamin D into 25 hydroxy vitamin D, okay, in the liver in the presence of 25 hydroxylases. Now this 25 hydroxy vitamin D will enter the kidney. Okay, in the kidney, in the presence of 1 alpha hydroxylase, it gets converted to 125 hydroxy vitamin D. Okay, this 125 dihydroxy vitamin D, this will promote the absorption of calcium and phosphate in intestine. One way, it will cause intestinal reabsorption of calcium and phosphate. It will cause, okay, this in the presence of renal tubule. Okay, so this from the parathyroid, see this is the parathyroid gland. From the parathyroid glands there are secretion of parathormone. This parathormone in turn activates the production of 125 hydroxy vitamin D, and it promotes calcium reabsorption and inhibits phosphate reabsorption. See, its calcium reabsorption is promoted by both vitamin D and parathormone, whereas vitamin D activates reabsorption of phosphate phosphorus, whereas this parathormone will inhibit the reabsorption of phosphorus. Okay, so if you see this parathormone and vitamin D, both these will promote osteoclastic reabsorption of calcium and phosphate from bone. So from bone, both these will promote osteoclastic reabsorption of calcium and phosphate from bone. Okay, so this is the whole picture of calcium and phosphate metabolism. So what is happening in chronic kidney disease? So once we have learnt the normal, now we will see the abnormal. This is the same pathway, but now what is happening here is there is kidney problem. So because of the problem in kidney, okay, there is in kidney, what is the first thing that is happening? The 25 hydroxy vitamin D3 which is produced in the liver, this gets converted to 125 dihydroxy vitamin D with the help of 125 hydroxylase. This is the process that is occurring in kidney. But here, because of the decreased renal mass, okay, renal mass, here there is decreased renal mass because of chronic kidney disease. This will lead to phosphate retention and it causes reduced 125 dihydroxy vitamin D production. So this vitamin D is decreased. Now because of decreased vitamin D, so the bone bone formation, osteoblastic activity will not occur properly. So this will lead to a disorder called as osteomalacia. It occurs, see, vitamin D deficiency causes rickets in childhood and it causes osteomalacia in adults. So these are the cysts. So because of osteomalacia, you see presence of cysts. Sometimes you see pseudo fractures occurring in the bone, or subperiosteal reabsorption can occur in the bone. Then if you see, this high parathormone also causes osteitis fibrosa cystica also. So here these are the osteoclasts which are seen. So it causes osteitis fibrosa cystica. Okay, so this is about the thing. Now because of this, because of decreased vitamin D, so calcium absorption and phosphate absorption is also decreased, and as a result there is low calcium. So this will, the calcium will promote the reabsorption of promote the release of parathormone. So because of that, there is hypertrophied parathyroid gland, leading to increased parathormone production. Okay, so this high parathormone will cause osteitis fibrosa cystica. So these are the features which you see in chronic kidney disease. Then if you see, just a minute, if you see, this is the progression of chronic kidney disease. So if you see, from onset to the from the stage of onset to the complications, what are you going to see? See, in chronic kidney disease, most of the nephrons have been undergone atrophy, and there is hypertrophy of some remaining nephrons. See, there is significant loss of number of nephrons. Because of significant loss of significant number of nephrons, this leads to hypertrophy of remaining nephrons. That is, the remaining nephrons become larger. See, this is the normal size of nephrons. There are many nephrons which have undergone atrophy, and because of that, the remaining nephrons which were there, they became larger, right? So there is hypertrophy in the nephrons. So as the time passes, there is also intraglomerular hypertension will occur, and this will also damage the residual nephrons which are present, and thus the patient goes into progressive loss of renal function in chronic kidney disease. So this is the picture of how the patient progresses in stages. See, in stage 3, the patient lands up in hypertension. Slowly the patient lands up in secondary hyperparathyroidism. Then the patient lands up in metabolic acidosis and anemia. Once he reaches stage 4, there will be hyperphosphatemia and hypocalcemia, and there is hyperkalemia associated with stage 4. In stage 5, the patient goes into volume overload and uremia. So these are the different stages which you see in chronic kidney disease. Then if you see, just 1 minute, I'm sorry, I'm just okay. So what is uremia? What do you see in uremia? What are the signs and symptoms of uremia? In uremia, first you can see symptoms like restless leg syndrome, there is fatigue, headache and poor concentration, impaired taste and smell, and you see presence of seizures. The patient may manifest with seizures, muscle cramps and muscle twitches. There can be pericarditis associated with it. Uremic frost is seen. Intense pruritus with excoriations, sometimes causing lichen simplex, prurigo nodularis. Keratotic papules are seen in the dermatological lesions. Dermatological lesions, you see uremic frost, other excoriations, lichen simplex, prurigo nodularis, keratotic papules and other lesions are seen. And here if you see, this shows thyroid dysfunction, and there is insulin resistance and amenorrhea associated with chronic kidney disease. And in the blood you have the lymphocyte dysfunction and infections, and there is platelet dysfunction and bleeding is also associated with that. Because of irritation of diaphragm, uremia causes irritation of diaphragm leading to hiccups. There are ulcers which are seen in the stomach. Uremic fever, that is the smell of that uremic fever can occur. Then it can be associated with nausea and vomiting. Occult lower GI bleed is seen, and anorexia is also seen. So these are the different symptoms. How these symptoms are manifested, I'll show you in a minute. Okay, now if you see, first we will see about the chronic kidney disease. Okay, so in the chronic kidney disease, this is the chronic kidney disease. So here what is chronic kidney disease? Here there is abnormal function of kidney. There is abnormal function of kidney, and because of this abnormal function of kidney, there is decreased GFR. Number one, there is abnormal function of kidney. This has resulted in decreased GFR. Okay, and there is a foundation which is National Kidney. We have something called as National Kidney Foundation 2002. This National Kidney Foundation 2002 has classified the chronic kidney disease. According to classification of chronic kidney disease of National Kidney Foundation, we have 5 stages. Okay, stage 1, in first stage 0. Stage 0 is if the GFR is more than 90 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square, associated with risk factors. In stage 0 there are risk factors associated with it, and the GFR is almost normal, that is more than 90 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. That is stage 0. Then we have stage 1. In stage 1, GFR is more than 90 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square, and this is also associated with persistent proteinuria, abnormal urine sediment, abnormal blood and urine chemistry. So these are seen in stage 1. Then we have stage 2. In stage 2, the GFR is 60 to 90 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. Then we have stage 3. In stage 3, the GFR is 30 to 59 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. In stage 4, we have GFR 15 to 29 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. In stage 5, the GFR is less than 15 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. You can remember as, if you remember, it is almost like 3 table. So we have, see, we have first, this is 15. Okay, see, I remember like this. If you see, we have 15. Remember 15 double 60, 60 if you double 30, 60 plus 30 you have 90. Okay, so these are the main things. If it is more than 90 plus risk factors, then that is stage 0. If it is more than 90 with some symptoms, whatever symptoms may be, like persistent proteinuria, abnormal urine sediment or abnormal urine or blood chemistry, then that is stage 2. Then if it is between 60 to 80, 60 to 90, that is 60 to 89, that is stage 2. If it is between 60 to 30, that is 30 to 60, that is stage 3. If it is between 15 to 30, then that is stage 4. If it is less than 15, then that is stage 5. So just remember these, then you can get these stages very easily. Okay, now once you have done with this, then What does the chronic kidney failure resemble? When do you call something has chronic kidney failure? Chronic kidney failure is when there is irreversible reduction in nephron number. Whenever there is irreversible reduction in nephron number, here we call it as chronic kidney failure. In this chronic kidney failure, you see that chronic kidney disease, here the stage is between 3 to 5. Okay, whenever the stage of chronic kidney disease is between 3 to 5, we can call it as chronic renal failure. Okay, then we have something called as end stage renal disease also. In this end stage renal disease, there is accumulation of toxins, fluids and electrolyte occurs, and as a result there is uremic syndrome, which is seen in end stage renal disease. Right, now let us see the risk factors of chronic kidney disease. The risk factors of chronic kidney disease mainly include, I have already shown you all these pictures, right? It includes hypertension, diabetes mellitus. It is associated with any autoimmune diseases. It is associated with chronic kidney disease, is associated with old age, that is more than 65 years of age, Africans, family history, previous history of kidney disease. Okay, and there can be abnormal urinary sediment or mainly urinary tract obstruction, and there is genetic loci, which is APOL1 gene is associated especially in African ancestry with chronic kidney disease. The etiological factors, these are the risk factors. Then if you see the etiology, in etiology we have mainly the diabetes glomerulonephritis, hypertensive glomerulopathy or hypertensive nephropathy, glomerulonephritis, autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease, tubulointerstitial nephropathy. So if you see, all these diseases can lead to the chronic kidney disease. Okay, now in chronic kidney disease can be divided into two types. One, we have silent primary glomerulonephropathy, and we have progressive nephrosclerosis. Okay, in silent primary glomerulopathy, it is mainly focal segmental glomerulonephritis. If you see, we have progressive nephrosclerosis and hypertension. This progressive nephrosclerosis and hypertension results in the production of vasoactive chemicals, creatinine kinase and growth factors. So all these vasoactive hormones, creatinine kinase and growth factors, will cause decrease in decrease in nephron number, and they cause hypertrophy and hyperfiltration of nephrons. I've shown you the picture, right? They will cause decrease in nephron number, and they will also cause hypertrophy and hyperfiltration of nephron number. So this will lead to distortion of glomerular architecture, sclerosis, and dropout of remaining nephrons. So over years, as the years passes, these will lead to decreased renal mass. This decreased renal mass will lead to accumulation of toxins and metabolites in the body. Okay, so this is how the progression of chronic kidney disease is seen. Then if you see, then we will see how are you going to stage this chronic kidney disease. The staging of chronic kidney disease is, first we will have to modify the diet. From modification of diet in renal study, we have this staging where estimated GFR is taken into account, and this estimated GFR is equal to 1.86 into plasma creatinine concentration. You can divide the estimated GFR is equal to 1.86 into plasma creatinine to the power of 1.154 into H to the power of minus 0.203. Okay, that is called as estimated GFR. Okay, this is estimated GFR which you are seeing here. Okay, then here in plasma creatinine is nothing but serum creatinine. So this, for this estimated GFR, we will have to multiply 0.72742 for women and 1.21 for African American. So for women you will have to multiply it with 0.742, and for African American you will have to multiply it with 1.21. So estimated GFR is equal to 1.86 into plasma creatinine to the power of minus 1.154 into H to the power of minus 0.203. Okay, so that is estimated GFR, which is given in milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. And that is one formula. We have one more formula which is called as Cronkhorst-Gault equation. According to this so we have something called as Cockcroft-Gault equation. Okay, according to this Cockcroft-Gault equation, we have estimation of estimated creatinine clearance. Estimated creatinine clearance is equal to 140 minus H into body weight in kgs by 12 into plasma creatinine in the measurement of milligram per deciliter. According to Cockcroft-Gault equation, we have estimated creatinine clearance is equal to 140 minus H into body weight in kgs by 12 into plasma creatinine in milligrams per deciliter. You will have to multiply 0.85. If it is for women, you will have to multiply 0.85. okay, so if you see this GFR, okay, this will gradually see the GFR in a third decade. If you see what is the GFR which is in third decade, the GFR is equal to 120 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. So GFR during third decade is 120 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square is the GFR which you see in third decade. So from third decade, that is from 30 years, the GFR starts to decline. So here if you see, the GFR is declining, right? From the third decade, that is from 30 years, there is decline in GFR, and this decline in GFR is like 1 milliliter per minute per 1.73 meter square decrease in GFR is present, and the mean value of GFR at 30 years will be 70 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. Okay, so you should remember that the peak GFR will be present in 30 years, and after 30 years the GFR decreases slowly. The decline is 1 milliliter per minute per 1.73 meter square. Then once you have seen the GFR, now if you see the clinical features, you will see uremia, that is disturbances, uremic disturbances are seen in each and every organ. Okay, in this first you will see the sodium and water hemostasis. So in sodium and water hemostasis we have renal diseases. These renal diseases, here the dietary sodium, whenever there is renal diseases, if the dietary sodium is more than sodium excretion, that is the amount of the sodium that we take in diet, if it is more than the amount of urinary sodium which is excreted, then that leads to sodium retention. Okay, this sodium retention will in turn lead to hypertension. Okay, this hypertension will lead to nephron injury. What does this hypertension lead to? It causes nephron injury. Now if the water intake is more than water excreted, just take an example where water intake is more than water excretion, similar to sodium intake more than sodium excretion. So there is retention of water and there is retention of sodium also. Because of retention of both water and sodium, this results in isotonic extracellular volume. Sometimes if you see, volume overload can also occur. In this case, whenever the amount of volume which is taken is less than, if the amount of volume which is taken intake is more than the sodium which is retained, then it can cause volume overload and hypernatremia also. So these can also occur in chronic kidney disease. It just depends upon how much water or sodium which the person takes. Then we have second, after sodium we have potassium hemostasis. See, whenever there is decreased GFR, this decreased GFR causes decreased potassium excretion. Okay, decreased GFR causes decreased potassium excretion, and because of that there is hyperkalemia. Okay, that is one way of hyperkalemia. Second, this also decrease, there is potassium excretion from GIT. So because of potassium excretion from GIT, there will be hypokalemia. So in chronic kidney disease, one can have either hyperkalemia or hypokalemia. Anything can happen. Okay, what are the causes for hyperkalemia in chronic kidney disease? So if you see, in chronic kidney disease, hyperkalemia is seen whenever there is dietary potassium intake, okay, intake of dietary potassium intake, or when the patient has more protein catabolism, hemolysis, hemorrhage, transfusion of stored RBCs, metabolic acidosis, decreased dietary potassium, protein catabolism, hemodialysis, hemorrhage, transfusion of stored RBCs, metabolic acidosis. So all these will result in hyperkalemia. And sometimes drugs like ACE inhibitors, ARBs, spironolactone, potassium sparing diuretics, amiloride, eplerenone, and triamterene, all these will also cause hyperkalemia. And in potassium you can also see hypokalemia, as I have already said. In hypokalemia, this can occur due to decreased dietary intake, or it can occur due to primary renal wasting. Decreased dietary intake or primary renal wasting can lead to hypokalemia. Okay, so this can occur, that is one way. Then second, there can be primary renal wasting. Primary renal wasting can be due to Fanconi syndrome, renal tubular acidosis, or tubulointerstitial disease. All these can cause primary renal potassium wasting, thus causing hypokalemia. So you can have both hypokalemia and hyperkalemia in potassium hemostasis. Then now, after potassium hemostasis, we will have to see the metabolic acidosis. So in chronic kidney disease, most commonly it is associated with metabolic acidosis. Now the question is how? So in chronic kidney disease, if you see, there is less ammonia, right? So because there is less ammonia, normally ammonia combines with proton H plus and it forms ammonium ions, right? But here there is less ammonia, so there is no ammonium ions. Okay, because of less ammonia, there is no ammonium ions at all. So because of this no ammonium ions, okay, these were not there, and this is less, but hydrogen is already present, so this hydrogen will increase, right? Only then this will not be found. So there is more hydrogen. So what does this increased proton leads to? This will lead to metabolic acidosis. So this is one way how metabolic acidosis is seen in chronic kidney disease. And sometimes we have one more mechanism. Sometimes if you see, we have hyperkalemia in the second mechanism, we have hyperkalemia in chronic kidney disease, right? This hyperkalemia also decreases ammonium level, right? So whenever there is decreased ammonium level, again there is increased metabolic acidosis, correct? So this decreased ammonium level also causes metabolic acidosis, and this metabolic acidosis which you see in chronic kidney disease is a type of non-anion gap metabolic acidosis. You should remember that this metabolic acidosis is a type of non-anion gap metabolic acidosis which should be taken into account. Then if you see, in the early stages of chronic kidney disease, diabetic nephropathy or proximal tubulointerstitial disease or obstructive uropathy, in all these cases you see this metabolic acidosis. Then slowly, as the worsening of renal function increases, the acid excretion is limited to, so if you see, the slowly as the renal function worsens, the acid excretion is only limited to 30 to 40 millimoles per millimoles. So as a result, all the anions will increase slowly, and this increase in anions will lead to anion gap metabolic acidosis, increased anion gap metabolic acidosis. So in metabolic acidosis, in chronic kidney disease, there are also disorders of calcium and phosphate metabolism. So in the disorders of calcium and phosphate metabolism, because of that, first there can be, first as I have said, there will be increased increased parathormone levels. Because of increased parathormone levels, this can be associated with high bone turnover with increased parathormone levels. Okay, there is high bone turnover with increased parathormone levels. This increased parathormone levels will decrease the GFR. They will decrease the excretion of phosphate. Okay, because of these, what does this high bone turnover leads to? Whenever there is high bone turnover, this will first increase the parathormone levels. Okay, and because of increased parathormone levels, first there will be decreased GFR, which will decrease the excretion of phosphate. Okay, first there is decreased GFR, which leads to excretion of phosphate. Because of that decreased excretion of phosphate, and because of that there is retention of phosphate, right? Whenever there is retention of phosphate, this will activate the parathormone. This parathormone causes activates the bone turnover, leading to something called as osteitis fibrosa cystica is seen in the bones. Okay, then that is, as the name says, there will be inflammation of bone with fibrosis and cystic spaces. Then if you see bone histology, in bone histology you will see abnormal bone to bone marrow fibrosis. Okay, there will be abnormal bone and bone marrow fibrosis is seen. So first in the bone histology you will see abnormal osteoid bone and bone marrow fibrosis, and slowly as the stage changes, in the advanced stage you will see bone cysts with hemorrhagic elements. Okay, because it contains hemorrhagic elements, that hemorrhage slowly it becomes formation of hematomas, small hematomas, which will resolve and leading to brown colored structure, and this is called as brown tumor. Okay, this will give rise to brown tumor. And because of this high bone turnover, there is it is associated with end fractures, pain, bone marrow fibrosis. Okay, all these will lead to calcification at the end. So this is what it is seen in high bone turnover diseases. And there is also one more which is important, which is called as low bone turnover disease. So what do you see in low bone turnover disease? Low bone turnover disease can be divided into two types. Low bone turnover disease can be divided into two types. One, it is adynamic bone disease. Okay, second we have osteomalacia. So in adynamic bone disease, as the name says, there is decreased blood volume and mineralization. This adynamic disease mainly occurs due to decreased parathormone levels. And this low bone turnover disease is also associated with osteomalacia. Okay, this osteomalacia causes accumulation of unmineralized bone matrix, and because of this accumulation of unmineralized bone matrix, it causes osteomalacia. Okay, here why does this osteomalacia occurs? It mainly occurs due to vitamin D deficiency and past aluminum deposition. See, because of decreased parathormone, it causes adynamic bone disease, whereas because of the deficiency of vitamin D and past aluminum deposition, it causes osteomalacia. And one important thing here is this FGF23. Okay, this fibroblast growth factor 23 activates parathormone, thus activating renal phosphate excretion. This is a risk factor for ventricular hypertrophy. Okay, so this is what you see in this thing. In primary hyperparathyroidism, we have something called as calciphylaxis, which is very important. What is this calciphylaxis? It is also called as calcemic uremic arteriolopathy. So what do you see in this calciphylaxis or calcemic uremic arteriolopathy? This is mainly preceded by libido reticularis. What is libido reticularis? It is lace-like purplish discoloration of skin. So it is preceded by lace-like purplish discoloration of skin, and here you see patches of necrosis, ischemic necrosis on legs, thigh, abdomen and breast. Okay, it contains two things. One, it contains soft tissue, and along with that it contains vascular elements, and along with that there is soft tissue calcification seen. What are the causes of this calciphylaxis? The causes of calciphylaxis are, it is seen in chronic kidney disease, hyperparathyroidism and warfarin. Calciphylaxis is seen in chronic kidney disease, hyperparathyroidism and warfarin. Then let us learn about CVS abnormalities. So you have first here CVS abnormalities. In the CVS abnormalities, we have most importantly, CVS abnormalities are associated with, first we have myocardial risk factors which are associated with CVS abnormalities. These myocardial risk factors include, we have anemia, phosphates, increased phosphorus, increased parathyroid, sleep apnea, increased acute phase reactants, that is increased creatinine kinase and C-reactive protein, decreased negative acute phase reactants like albumin, fettuin, hypovolemia, hypertension. So all these are seen in CVS abnormalities. All these will increase the risk factors of CVS abnormalities. What are they? Anemia, increased phosphates, hypertension, sleep apnea, increased acute phase reactants like creatinine kinase, C-reactive protein, decreased negative acute phase reactants like albumin, fettuin, hypertension and hypovolemia. If you see the clinical features, mainly this CVS abnormalities are associated with pericarditis, pericardial effusion which can lead to cardiac tamponade. So these are the conditions in which the CVS abnormalities are associated with it. And in CVS abnormalities, if there is, remember, if there is uremic pericarditis, this uremic pericarditis is an absolute indication of dialysis. So if you remember, this uremic pericarditis is an absolute indication of dialysis. Okay, then that is CVS abnormalities. Then we have to see the hematological abnormalities. So in the hematological abnormalities, first the patient has anemia. Okay, because whenever there is, normally kidney produces erythropoietin. So whenever there is chronic kidney disease, obviously there is decreased erythropoietin, and this decreased erythropoietin mainly starts from stage 3. Okay, because it starts from stage 3, so the anemia is manifested from stage 3. Okay, so this anemia can be different types. So this anemia can be related to iron deficiency, or it can be related to acute chronic and chronic inflammation with impaired renal impaired iron utilization, or it can be due to severe hyperparathyroidism. So this anemia which we are talking about can be due to iron deficiency, acute and chronic inflammation with impaired iron utilization, or severe hyperparathyroidism. Okay, the treatment of this anemia is mainly recombinant human erythropoietin production. So main treatment of this iron, of this anemia is recombinant human erythropoietin, and we also have some modified erythropoietin proteins are also seen, and these include, we have darbepoetin alpha and eptoin alpha. Modified erythropoietin proteins are darbepoetin alpha and eptoin alpha. Okay, there is iron supplementation for bone marrow iron stores also. So if there is any resistance, if the patient shows resistance to this erythropoietin hormone, then you will have to treat the cause, or final treatment like blood transfusion can be given for these patients also. Okay, so this is hematological abnormality, which is anemia. Then we have one more abnormality, which is abnormality in homeostasis. So if you see in homeostasis, in the last stages of end stage renal disease, you can have the problem in hemostasis, where there can be increased bleeding time, decreased platelet factor 3, abnormal platelet aggregation and adhesiveness, and impaired prothrombin consumption. See, this can cause increased bleeding time, decreased platelet factor 3, abnormal aggregation and adhesiveness, impaired prothrombic consumption is seen. Okay, because of nephrotic range proteinuria also, there is loss of this anticoagulants, and because of loss of this anticoagulant, it will lead to thrombophilic stage. Okay, so this is important thing about the chronic kidney disease, where you see abnormal hemostasis with increased bleeding time, decreased platelet factor 3, abnormal platelet aggregation and adhesiveness, and impaired prothrombic consumption. So at the end, there is increased bleeding is seen. So all these, actually what does all these lead to? They will lead to increased bleeding manifestations are seen with this chronic kidney disease. Okay, then we have the next thing, which is called as neuromuscular abnormalities. So what do you see in neuromuscular abnormalities? In this we have CNS abnormalities, which includes impairment of memory, concentration, There is impairment of memory, concentration, sleep disturbance, neuromuscular instability, which includes, these are important, hiccups especially, cramps and fasciculations, and also associated with twitching of muscles. Okay, all this will progress to, as the uremic conditions increases, all these will progress to hysterexis, myoclonus, seizures and coma. As the uremia increases, there can be hysterexis, myoclonus, seizures and coma. This CNS abnormalities are also associated with sensory abnormalities more than motor abnormalities. These are more common in the lower limbs when compared to upper limbs. Okay, this can also is also associated with restless leg syndrome. So in the restless leg syndrome, you will see ill defined sensations of discomfort over the leg and feet, which are only relieved by frequent leg movements. So these restless leg syndrome is seen. What is the treatment of choice for restless leg syndrome? The drug of choice is ropinirole, okay, which is a dopamine agonist. Then that is about the CNS symptoms. Then we have GIT and nutritional abnormalities. In GIT and nutritional abnormalities, we have something called as uremic fetor. That is, uremic fetor is nothing but presence of urine like odor in the breath. This is urine like odor in the breath. Why is this urine like odor in the breath? So urea gets converted to ammonia in the saliva. The urea which is there, that gets converted to ammonia in the saliva. So because ammonia is present in the saliva, this will lead to uremic fetor, and it also causes unpleasant metallic taste or dysgeusia. Okay, it causes uremic fetor and it also causes unpleasant metallic taste and dysgeusia. And along with that, in the GIT there are symptoms like gastritis, peptic disease and mucosal ulceration are also seen due to GIT and nutritional abnormalities. So here you can do dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. What does this dual energy X-ray absorptiometry tell you? This will tell us about the lean body mass and the extracellular fluid volume, which is important. So for nutritional abnormality, we can do this dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, which will tell us about the lean body mass versus extracellular fluid volume, right? So these are the GI and nutritional abnormalities. Then after nutritional abnormalities, then we have endocrine and metabolic disturbances. So in endocrine and metabolic disturbances, this causes increase in plasma levels of insulin. Number one, it causes increased insulin. So because of increased insulin, it also causes sometimes hyperglycemia. Okay, it causes increase in triglycerides, HDL, increased oxidized LDL. It causes increased lipoprotein A, ApoB or ApoC is increased, LDL is normal. So all these are seen. In females, if you see, it causes decreased estrogen. Because of decreased estrogen, there will be menstrual abnormalities which can lead to infertility. In males, there is decreased testosterone. Okay, this decreased testosterone in males can lead to oligospermia. There is decreased sperms in the with sperm production. Okay, that is oligospermia is seen because of decreased testosterone. Infertility is seen because of low estrogen, that is due to menstrual abnormalities. If you see, if this GFR is less than, remember that if GFR is less than 40%, there is high rate of spontaneous abortions. Spontaneous abortions are seen if GFR is less than 40%. It is also associated with increased cortisol, increased growth hormone, decreased insulin like growth factor, increased FSH and decreased LH is seen, increased prolactin is seen. So all these are the endocrine and metabolic disturbances which are seen in chronic kidney disease. Then we have dermatological abnormalities which are important. So in the dermatological abnormalities, the most common symptom in dermatological abnormalities is pruritus, and this is called as, given a name which is called as uremic pruritus. Here there is deposition of retained pigment metabolites or urochrome is seen. Here you see deposition of retained pigment metabolites or urochromes are seen on the skin. Okay, this is something called as, we call this as nephrogenic fibrogenic dermopathy. So here it is nephrogenic fibrogenic dermopathy is associated with chronic kidney disease. It is also called as prurigo nodularis. What is prurigo nodularis? It is nephrogenic fibrogenic dermopathy. Here there is progressive subcutaneous. So what happens in nephrogenic fibrogenic dermopathy? Here there is progressive subcutaneous induration on arms and legs, similar to scleromyxedema. Okay, it is seen in patients exposed to MR contrast agents, that is gadolinium, and this, so as a result the use of gadolinium is decreased in stage 2 chronic kidney disease, and you should avoid it in stage 3 to stage 5 chronic kidney disease due to this complication of nephrogenic fibrogenic dermopathy. I will show you the pictures of this nephrogenic fibrogenic dermopathy also. Sometimes you can see diffuse medial calcification, which is parathormone dependent, and you can see intimal calcification, which is parathormone independent. Now if you see the diagnosis, we have serum and urine. We can do serum and urine electrophoresis. In this serum and urine electrophoresis, if more than, see, remember, if you do serum and urine electrophoresis for patients who are more than 35 years with unexplained chronic kidney disease, anemia, normal or increased calcium, always suspect multiple myeloma. Always suspect multiple myeloma if in any case the serum and urine electrophoresis levels shows electrophoresis. See, you should do serum and urine electrophoresis for multiple myeloma, especially if the patient is more than 35 years of age and has unexplained chronic kidney disease and anemia and increased or normal calcium levels. Okay, you should do serum, calcium, phosphate, vitamin D, parathormone, hemoglobin concentration, iron, vitamin B12, folate, 24-hour urine collection. So all these should be done. Then if you see imaging, for the imaging you have to do renal ultrasound. So in the renal ultrasound you will have to see the size of the kidney. So we have two types. One, the size can be normal, or the size can show bilaterally small. So if the size of the kidney is bilaterally small, this shows that the chronic kidney disease has irreversible component of scarring. So bilaterally small kidneys shows that there is chronic kidney disease with irreversible component of scarring. Whereas if the size of the kidney is normal, then this shows that there is acute or subacute disease. It is associated with diabetic nephropathy, HIV nephropathy and amyloidosis. If size is normal, then it shows that there is acute or subacute disease associated with diabetic nephropathy, HIV nephropathy and amyloidosis. Okay, so this is about the imaging. Then you should do renal biopsy. So if you do renal biopsy, you can do either prior to the prior, or you can do immediately, but you should administer desmopressin is administered in order to control the hemostasis, because if you remember, there are blood abnormalities. In that there is abnormality in hemostasis, that is, there is increased bleeding manifestations are seen with chronic kidney disease. So in order to control the bleeding manifestations, you can administer desmopressin, which will inhibit the von Willebrand factor and thus decrease the bleeding. Okay, so what do you see in renal biopsy? You see bilaterally, if bilaterally small kidneys are seen, then the renal biopsy is not advised. Why? Because of decrease in bleeding and because of increased bleeding, and there is increased scarring, and also because they are small kidney, it is very difficult to perform renal biopsy. So because of that, if there are bilaterally small kidneys are seen on ultrasonography, we do not advise renal biopsy. Then what are the conditions where the renal biopsy is contraindicated? Renal biopsy is mainly contraindicated in uncontrolled hypertension, active UTI, bleeding diastasis and severe obesity. Uncontrolled hypertension is because this can increase because of renal biopsy. Then in active UTI, this infection can transfer or transmit to the adjacent areas. In bleeding diastasis, because there is increased chances of bleeding. In severe obesity, it is difficult to obtain a renal biopsy. So in these conditions, we contraindicate, we don't do renal biopsy. You can sometimes do ultrasound guided percutaneous biopsy is the favored approach in renal biopsy. If there is small kidney, Okay, then you can do either, if the kidney is very small, and you should definitely do renal biopsy if you feel so, then you can do either surgical or laparoscopic approach can also be considered if the kidney is small. Sorry, if the kidney is single, I'm sorry, if there is only one kidney, not small, if the kidney is single, that is there is only one kidney, then you will have to do surgical laparoscopic approach is considered. So if you see the history of kidney, so let us know the differences between acute kidney injury and chronic kidney injury. So in acute kidney injury, whenever there is history of kidney disease, see, these are the main important things. History of kidney disease is more common in acute kidney injury. Serum creatinine increased in more than 3 months in chronic kidney injury. Anemia is mainly present in chronic kidney injury. Small sized kidneys, renal osteodystrophy, band keratopathy, tolerance to azotemia, peripheral neuropathy, and secondary increase in parathormone. All these are mainly present in chronic kidney disease. Okay, there is only history of kidney disease is the only positive finding in acute kidney injury. Then see, what are the conditions we have seen? The in chronic kidney disease, in most of the conditions there will be a small kidneys, right? That's we have told. But there are conditions where there are enlarged kidneys in chronic kidney disease. Enlarged kidneys in chronic kidney disease are seen in polycystic kidney disease, rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis, diabetic nephropathy, mesangioglomerulosclerosis. Enlarged kidneys in chronic kidney disease is seen in polycystic kidney disease, diabetic nephropathy, mesangioglomerulosclerosis, and rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis. So in these cases you see enlarged kidney in chronic kidney disease. Then how are you going to treat it? If you see the treatment of chronic kidney disease, first you will have to see the clinical action plan. So in this clinical action plan, if there is stage 1, okay, that is the GFR is more than 90 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square, in this we will have to diagnose and treat the comorbid condition. So once you diagnose and treat the comorbid condition, obviously this will result in decrease the progression. Then we have stage 2. In stage 2, this occurs with mild decrease in GFR, where GFR is 80 to 89. Sorry, this is 60, where GFR is 60 to 89 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. In this you will have to estimate the progression of the disease. Then if there is stage 3, that is moderate decrease in GFR, where the GFR is 30 to 59 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. In this you will have to evaluate and treat for the complications. Then we have stage 4, where there is severe decrease in GFR, that is the GFR is 15 to 29 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meter square. In this you should prepare the kidney for replacement therapy, because the GFR is decreased so much that you cannot do normal functioning with that is 15 to 29. And if the GFR is in stage 5, that is GFR is less than 15, so in this you will have to do a kidney replacement for sure. So less than 50 GFR, definitely kidney replacement. 15 to 29 GFR, prepare for kidney replacement therapy. 30 to 59 GFR, evaluate for complications. 60 to 89 GFR, then you have to estimate the progression. And if it is for stage 1, that is more than 90, that is normal GFR, in such cases you should see you should try to treat the comorbid conditions to decrease the progression of the disease. Then we have two types in stage 5. In stage 5 we have stage 5D if the patient is on dialysis. Then we have stage 5T if the patient is on transplantation. Okay, so these are the different treatments which we do for based on the stages. So how are you going to slow the progression of the disease? First, for slowing of progression of the disease, first you will have to reduce the intraglomerular hypertension and proteinuria. So for decreasing the intraglomerular hypertension and proteinuria, the target BP that should be avoided, that should be assumed, is 125 by 75 millimeters of Hg in proteinuric chronic kidney disease patients. In proteinuric chronic kidney disease patients, the target BP is 125 by 75 millimeters of Hg. Then you can use angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors and ARBs. So these will also inhibit angiotensin, and thus these will cause vasodilatation of efferent arterioles of glomerular microcirculation. So these ACE inhibitors and ARBs inhibit angiotensin and cause vasodilatation of efferent arterioles of glomerular microcirculation, and thus this will decrease the glomerular filtration pressure and thus decrease the proteinuria, and thus these will decrease the glomerular filtration pressure, thus decreasing proteinuria. So for ACE inhibitors and ARBs, the side effect will be cough, angioedema, anaphylaxis, hyperkalemia is the side effect of angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors and ARBs. Then the drugs like calcium channel blockers, diltiazem and verapamil also have antiproteinuric and renoprotective effects. The drugs like calcium channel blockers and diltiazem and verapamil have antiproteinuric and renoprotective effects. Okay, so these are the drugs which you use for reducing the intraglomerular hypertension and proteinuria. Then after hypertension, the most important disease which is associated with chronic kidney disease is diabetic renal disease. So for controlling the diabetic renal disease, first you should control the blood sugar levels. Okay, so for controlling the blood sugar levels, the target blood sugar levels preprandial is 5 to 7.2 millimoles per liter, and hemoglobin should be less than 7%. Preprandial glucose target is 5 to 7.5 millimoles per liter, and hemoglobin HbA1c should be less than 7%. Then for this you can give the drugs like chlorpropamide. Chlorpropamide is actually associated with prolonged hypoglycemia in decreased renal functions, and metformin causes lactic acidosis if there is renal impairment. So this metformin causes lactic acidosis if there is renal impairment, and it is discontinued if GFR is less than is decreased. So we don't give metformin for chronic kidney disease. And we have thiazolidinediones. What does this thiazolidinediones do? These will increase the renal salt and water absorption and thus increase the volume overload states. So you should avoid all these drugs. So these are the drugs which are avoided, like chlorpropamide, because they can cause prolonged hypoglycemia, and you should also avoid thiazolidinediones because they will increase the volume overload states. So you should avoid all these drugs. Then in the second thing, you should control BP and proteinuria and diabetic renal disease. That means you should control both BP and proteinuria, and also you should be in a state to control the diabetic renal disease. So for this, the main important thing which is which is a precipitating factor for kidney disease is microalbuminuria. Microalbuminuria is the precipitating factor for kidney disease. So here we have angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors and ARBs will provide renoprotection, and this is very important. ACE inhibitors and ARBs are the drugs which will provide renoprotection, and thus you will have to definitely give angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors and ARBs. Okay, so these will inhibit angiotensin driven sclerosing pathways of diabetes mellitus, and this will help in decreasing the progression of the disease. Then we have the next important thing which you have to do here is protein restriction. In protein restriction, we have a clinical practice guidelines which is called as KDOQ1 clinical practice guidelines. So according to this KDOQ1 clinical practice guidelines, we have two things. So that the daily protein intake should be at least 0.60 to 0.75 gram per kg per day. So according to these guidelines, the daily protein intake should be at least 0.60 to 0.75 gram per kg per day, depending on the adherence, comorbid disease, proteinuria and nutritional status. Depending on the adherence, comorbid disease, proteinuria, and nutritional status, the daily protein intake should be at least 0.65 to 0.75 gram per kg per day. So if you see in stage 5, especially in stage 5 kidney disease, the spontaneous protein intake is decreased. If this spontaneous protein intake is decreased, this will lead to PEM. Okay, then total body weight is equal to height in centimeters by minus 100. We have cholesterol reduction therapy should be done so that the LDL should be less than 100 milligram per deciliter. Okay, so this is about the diabetes and hypertension. Then what about managing the other complications? What are the drugs which are avoided in chronic kidney disease? These are the drugs which are avoided in chronic kidney disease, which include metformin, meperidine, oral hypoglycemics. NSAIDs are avoided in chronic kidney disease. Drugs like metformin, meperidine, oral hypoglycemics, and NSAIDs are avoided in chronic kidney disease. Okay, the drugs whose dose is to be reduced in chronic kidney disease are antibiotics, antiarrhythmics, antihypertensives. Dose should be decreased in chronic kidney disease. Okay, so these drugs are very important. Then if you see preparation for renal replacement therapy, so what are the indications for renal replacement therapy? The indications for renal replacement therapy mainly includes, we have uremic pericarditis, uremic pleuritis, progressive uremic encephalopathy, intractable muscle cramping, bleeding diastasis, persistent metabolic disturbances like refractory hyperkalemia, metabolic acidosis, fluid overload conditions, refractory to diuretics. So these are the different conditions where you should do renal replacement therapy. What are they? Whenever there is uremic pericarditis, uremic pleuritis, progressive uremic encephalopathy, intractable muscle cramping, bleeding diastasis, persistent metabolic disturbances like refractory hyperkalemia, metabolic acidosis, fluid overload, refractory to diuretics, persistent hypertension, poorly responsive to antihypertensives. So these are the places where you should give renal replacement therapy. Then when to start on dialysis or hypertension, this is important. On transplantation, sorry, when should you start dialysis or transplantation? See, if after development of if you have two options. One, you can start dialysis after uremic symptoms, or you can also start dialysis in healthy patients before uremic signs and symptoms. So if you start transplantation after development of uremic symptoms, then it shows worst prognosis. If you start transplantation after the development of uremic symptoms, then it can cause worst prognosis. If you start this transplantation and dialysis in healthy patients before the uremic signs and symptoms, that shows better prognosis, right? Then if you see contraindications of dialysis include, so we don't do dialysis if there is recent cardiothoracic surgery, because this will increase the complications of dialysis. Okay, because if you have recent cardiothoracic surgery, there is increased risk of infections also. Then we don't do dialysis if there is diaphragmatic fluoroperitoneal connection or increased catabolism, life-threatening hyperkalemia, or severe respiratory failure. So in all these conditions, the dialysis is mainly contraindicated. Then what is the most common cause of death in patients on dialysis? The most common cause of death in patients on dialysis is, overall most common cause of death is cardiovascular disease. Then what is the most common cause of death in patients on dialysis in acute renal failure? The most common cause of death in patients on dialysis in acute renal failure is infection, and the most common cause of death in patients on dialysis in chronic renal failure is CVS causes, that is cardiovascular causes. We said dialysis is important in the treatment of renal failure. We have two types of dialysis or renal replacement therapy which are available for chronic renal failure. They are, first we have continuous renal replacement therapy. In this we have to perform this renal replacement therapy continuously. Then we have slow efficiency dialysis, where we give 6 to 7 hours of dialysis we give per session, and we give it either weekly or daily, depending upon the severity of the disease. So this is about the chronic kidney disease. I will show you some pictures which are important in chronic kidney disease and end the topic here. So in chronic kidney disease, sorry, I could not find many pictures because it is a clinical condition, and all the histology and ultrasound features will be according to the cause of chronic kidney disease, right? If there is glomerulonephritis, you will have features of glomerulonephritis. If there is diabetic retinopathy or diabetic nephropathy, then you will have features of diabetic nephropathy. So I could not get the proper clinical features, but in 2012 there are guidelines which are changed, which are called as KDIGO guidelines. So according to KDIGO guidelines, it has given the prognosis for chronic kidney disease. You don't need to remember these in depth, but remember that for the prognosis they have added these two things as important. One, persistent albuminuria. This persistent albuminuria is divided into three categories, as if A1, which is less than 30 milligram per deciliter or less than 3 milligram per millimoles, A2 where 30 to 300 milligrams per gram or 3 to 30 milligrams per millimole. In A3 there is more than 300 milligrams per deciliter or there is 30 milligram per millimole. Okay, this is given as A, and we have taken GFR. These GFR categories are almost similar, which I have told you. So based on these GFR categories and albuminuria categories, we have divided the prognosis for chronic kidney disease. Okay, so this is about chronic kidney disease. Thank you guys for watching my lecture. In the next class we will learn about glomerulonephritis. Thank you.